Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. It was supposed to be a quiet Saturday morning, coffee brewing, birds chirping, peace hard-earned. But when the HOA came pounding on his door at 6 a.m., armed with clipboards and fake authority, one man stood his ground and sparked a war that would shake the whole neighborhood. There's a very particular kind of peace that settles over my house on a Saturday morning. It's not silence exactly. The ceiling fan hums, the birds chirp outside, the coffee maker clicks on automatically at 6:30. But it's a peace I earned. One day off a week, that's all I ask. I spend it fixing up the porch, working on my old pickup, maybe making pancakes for my kids if they're actually up before noon. My wife sometimes sleeps in, sometimes joins me for a quiet breakfast out on the deck. No alarms, no barking orders, just peace. Except that morning, there was a knock. No, not a knock. A pounding. At 6:01 a.m., I shot up in bed like a firehouse bell had gone off. For a second, muscle memory kicked in from my years as a volunteer firefighter. I half expected to be throwing on boots and grabbing turnout gear. But I wasn't needed to put out a fire. Not unless the fire was wearing neon yellow vests with the HOA logo embroidered on the chest. I opened the door in my flannel pajama pants and an old t-shirt, still rubbing the sleep from my eyes. Standing on my porch were three people, two men, mid-30s, built like ex-high school linebackers who still thought they were cool, and a woman who looked like she'd stepped straight out of a PTA meeting. All of them had that smug HOA posture, clipboards in hand, little ID badges on lanyards, and matching reflective vests. One of the men raised his eyebrows and said, too brightly for this ungodly hour, "Good morning, sir. We're here for a safety inspection." I blinked. "You're here for a what?" "Safety inspection," the woman said, smiling. "We received an anonymous tip about potential hazards on your property. Structural and fire code concerns." "Anonymous tip," I repeated. "At 6 in the damn morning?" The second guy piped up. "Best to do inspections before people start their day. It's less disruptive." "I'm not even part of your HOA," I said, leaning on the doorframe. "My lot's outside your boundary line. You people know that. I've told Karen this at least 6 times. "We've been instructed to proceed regardless," the woman chirped. "Please allow us access to the interior and perimeter of your home." That did it. I didn't shout. Not yet. I didn't even slam the door in their faces, though Lord knows I wanted to. I just turned around, walked calmly into the house, and went straight to the entry closet. I keep my hunting rifle there. It's legal, licensed, and I take care of it like it's a damn antique violin. I've used it on deer, not people, but even a symbol of force, responsible force, has a way of resetting expectations. When I opened the door again, I was fully dressed, jeans, boots, jacket zipped halfway up, and holding the rifle barrel down at my side. Not aimed, not threatening, just present. The woman gasped. The big guy took a step back. Clipboard guy froze mid-note. "I told you," I said, my voice flat. "I am not part of your HOA. This is private property. You are trespassing." "You're threatening us with a gun," the woman screeched, already fumbling for her phone. "I'm telling you to leave." They didn't. They started recording instead, so I stepped out past the porch, lifted the rifle, aimed straight up at the sky, and fired 2 clean shots. Boom, boom. Not wild, not frantic, just deliberate. The sound echoed off the trees like thunder. Birds scattered. A car alarm went off down the street. The clipboard hit the ground with a hollow plastic clack, and just like that, they ran. All 3 of them, scrambling for their SUV like kids who rang the wrong doorbell on Halloween. Tires squealed as they peeled out of my driveway. I stood there, rifle still pointed up, heart pounding only slightly. I didn't feel like a maniac. I felt like a guy who finally drew the line in the sand. About 20 minutes later, I was calmly sipping coffee at the kitchen table when the red and blue lights lit up my window. 2 deputies approached slow, hands visible. I did everything by the book. I declared the weapon, showed the lockbox, provided my license, even offered the security footage. No arrests, just a report. They told me that someone named Karen Wainwright, of course it was her, had already called 911 claiming I'd brandished a weapon and opened fire on unarmed community volunteers. She left that part out where they pounded on my door before. "Sunrise," I said. One of the deputies, older guy with crow's feet and a familiar look in his eye, nodded. "We've had calls like this before. HOA's been active lately." By the afternoon, I had a copy of the incident report and something else. A manila envelope slipped under my garage door. Inside was a notice of civil complaint. The HOA was suing me for creating a hostile and dangerous environment, threatening officials, and destabilizing neighborhood safety. I laughed once, short and sharp. They really wanted a fight? They had just found it. It took less than 24 hours for the headlines to turn me into a lunatic. Local man fires weapon at HOA inspectors. Community shaken. Danger next door. Gun-toting neighbor refuses inspection. Armed homeowner goes rogue over routine check. Routine check. My ass. I sat in the living room the next morning, watching the local news while my wife paced behind me with her arms crossed. She hadn't said much, not out of anger, but out of that tight-lipped silence that meant she was thinking hard. My son peeked into the room from the hallway, eyes wide, as if I'd suddenly become a different man overnight. I hated that look. I wasn't dangerous, I was tired. The HOA had spun the entire thing into a safety crisis. Karen Wainwright had given a sobbing statement to the press, real tears and everything, about how we just wanted to make sure the neighborhood was safe and he aimed a gun at us. She made it sound like I was crouched behind the rose bushes with a sniper scope. What really pissed me off was how many people believed her. HOA cronies flooded the community Facebook group, posting exaggerated stories about my property, how I was building illegal extensions, burning trash in barrels, even harboring dangerous animals. For the record, the only wild thing on my property is my teenage daughter's music. But it didn't stop there. I got a second envelope, this one delivered officially, hand-delivered by a process server who looked like he hated his job. The civil complaint was real. They were suing me for threatening HOA personnel, creating a public disturbance, and refusing mandatory inspections related to fire code and structural safety. Mandatory, my ass. My house wasn't under their jurisdiction. Never had been. Still, I wasn't going to argue that on Facebook. I needed a plan, not a post. I called Marcus, an old friend, a former firefighter like me who'd gone back to school and ended up in law. He worked quiet cases now, mostly property and land use stuff. I trusted him more than anyone else to keep his head when things got messy. He showed up that afternoon with coffee and a briefcase and zero judgment. We sat out back on my deck while the sun dipped behind the neighbor's pines. I gave him everything. The video from my door camera, the audio of me telling them to leave, the stills showing them standing on my porch before dawn. I even had the shell casings from the warning shots in a bag. Marcus watched it all, took notes, then looked up and said, "You're in better shape than they think. They're going to spin it." Of course they are, but we're going to unspin it. He asked for all prior interactions with the HOA. I handed over a folder I'd been building for the last 3 years. Letters, notices, ridiculous fines, invitations to join the HOA that came with veiled threats if I refused. There were photos of HOA volunteers peering over my fence. One showed Karen herself standing on the edge of my driveway at night, clipboard in hand, pointing at my mailbox while talking to someone on the phone. "She's been laying this groundwork for years," I said. "She's always wanted me under their thumb." "Because you're not part of the HOA." "Exactly. And it makes her crazy." He nodded slowly. "We're not just going to defend you. We're going to make them regret dragging you into this." He wasn't wrong. That evening, I got a knock at the side door. Not the front, the side near the garage. It was Evan, a kid in his 20s who lived 2 streets over, tech guy, soft-spoken. He looked nervous as hell. "I heard what happened," he said. "They came to my house a few days ago. Karen asked if I'd testify against you, said you were dangerous, said if I didn't help her out, my renovation permits might get held up." I stared at him. "That's extortion. She does this all the time, to a bunch of us. I've got screenshots, messages, even a voice memo. I've been saving it just in case. Just in case." That's how most of us had been living, waiting, bracing, enduring the slow choke of HOA power games. But Evan wasn't just here to complain. "I want to help," he said. "I'll go on record. I'll get you more too. I'm technically still part of the committee. I can get access to emails, meeting notes, minutes, stuff they don't publish." A mole? A goddamn gift from heaven. We shook hands, and I told him one thing. Don't take risks. Send what you can. Be smart. Later that night, I got the first file. An internal message chain, Karen and 2 committee members discussing the strategy for my inspection. One message in particular made my skin go cold. Don't let him push back again. Early morning arrival means less resistance. If he opens the door, don't leave until you get inside. Say it's emergency protocol. Another message, we need to document his refusal. Get footage. If we're lucky, he'll overreact. We'll have grounds. They were baiting me. They weren't concerned about safety. They wanted a show, and I gave it to them, just not the one they planned. Marcus and I began assembling the response. Witness statements, camera footage, property maps showing my land was outside HOA boundaries, and now, internal messages that revealed premeditated provocation. But I knew this wasn't over. Karen had deeper claws than most snakes, and she hadn't even started digging yet. If there's one thing more exhausting than a neighborhood scandal, it's paperwork. Legal paperwork. Threatening, redundant, and intentionally confusing paperwork delivered with the sort of smugness only a bureaucrat in a polo shirt can muster. The lawsuit moved fast, faster than it should have. Karen must have greased every palm she could reach. Within days, Marcus and I were buried in documents, motions, emergency petitions, witness statements signed by people I'd never even spoken to. The HOA claimed I posed a credible and immediate danger to the neighborhood, that I had brandished an assault weapon, it was a hunting rifle, and fired indiscriminately at HOA representatives performing mandated duties. Mandated duties, my ass. Worse, the court granted a temporary restraining order forbidding me from approaching any HOA property, which, according to their delusional interpretation, included the shared parkway, a section of the sidewalk in front of my fence, and even the community mailbox. It was absurd. I had to reroute my morning walks just to avoid violating the damn thing. My wife was furious. They're trying to box us in, make us feel like criminals, she said. Like we don't belong here. They've been trying to do that since the day we moved in, I muttered. This is just them finally showing their cards. The hearing was set for 10 days later, but Karen wasn't about to wait quietly. No, she was going to stage a whole opera. First, the HOA published a letter to all residents, unsigned of course, warning of a recent incident involving an unstable resident and a firearm. They called it a reminder of the importance of unity and shared rules, and advised neighbors to report any suspicious or antisocial behavior. I got more than a few side eyes on my next grocery run. Second, she filed a new complaint, this time attaching a safety report from a licensed structural engineer, claiming my porch, roofline, and wiring posed a fire hazard and needed immediate inspection. The catch? The engineer's name was Gregory Wainwright. Her cousin, not even a licensed contractor in this state. Marcus smirked when he saw the document. This is actually good, he said. It's sloppy, obvious. Judges don't like fake experts. But the cherry on top came 3 days before the hearing. Karen appeared at a neighborhood fundraiser, a picnic for a local animal shelter, no less, wearing a neck brace, sunglasses, and one of those orthopedic boots you see people wear after twisting an ankle. I was grilling hot dogs for my daughter's school booth when I saw her hobble dramatically through the crowd. People gasped, some clapped. One woman even hugged her. She's such a brave soul. I overheard someone whisper, "Did you hear?" He shoved her, then fired right next to her head. She's lucky to be alive. I laughed, out loud. I couldn't help it. Karen heard me and turned her head slowly like a damn B-movie villain, then whispered something to a man I recognized, one of her cronies from the inspection morning. He started filming me with his phone. I just held up the spatula and waved. 2 hours later, a new motion hit our inbox. Karen had amended her civil complaint to include emotional and physical trauma resulting from violent confrontation. She now claimed that the gunfire had left her with acute hearing damage, PTSD, symptoms, and chronic vertigo. I swear to God, I said to Marcus that night, if she rolls into court in a wheelchair, I'm walking out. He didn't laugh. She might. But while she was busy playing tragic heroine, Evan was still feeding us gold. He'd gotten into the private HOA Slack channel. Apparently, they thought the password Unity for All was clever and pulled a treasure trove of messages. In one, Karen instructed another board member, "Keep the brace and boot until the hearing. Doctors won't testify unless we pay them, but sympathy works better anyway." Another, "Greg's report needs a new header. Strip the Florida address and use his Colorado license instead. Looks more official, and my favorite. If Harper brings up the jurisdiction issue again, claim the bylaws were updated in 2023. No one will check. Marcus nearly spat out his coffee. We're not just fighting pettiness anymore. This is outright fraud. I looked at the stack of printed messages and said, let's turn the heat up. So we prepared. Depositions, subpoenas, expert rebuttals. Marcus lined up a real engineer, one who actually had a license in-state and had done contract work for the city. He inspected my home and wrote a glowing report. Structurally sound, fire safe, no violations. We also filed a motion for full discovery, demanding internal HOA documents, meeting minutes, financial records. Karen would have to hand over the emails, the bank statements, the phony inspection requests. And I, for once, didn't feel on the defensive. I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was pushing forward. Let them lie. Let them hobble into court in casts and wraps. The more they leaned into the act, the harder they were going to fall. I wasn't angry anymore. I was focused. I don't like suits. I don't trust anyone who enjoys wearing them either. But that morning, I buttoned up the stiff navy jacket Marcus insisted I wear and stood in front of the mirror like a man about to walk into a duel, which frankly wasn't far from the truth. The courthouse was stuffy, windowless, and smelled like recycled fear and stale vending machine coffee. I sat next to Marcus at the long defense table, our paperwork stacked in neatly labeled folders like towers in a bureaucratic skyline. Across from us, Karen. She looked like death warmed over. The neck brace was still on, sunglasses indoors. The orthopedic boot had upgraded to a cane. If she'd had time, I swear she would have wheeled in on a gurney. And behind her, her army, clipboard guy, the two fake inspectors, and a couple of familiar HOA board members. She even brought someone who looked like a trauma counselor. Theatrics. The judge, a no-nonsense woman with short gray hair and the sharp tone of someone who hated liars, called us to order. Karen's attorney, a man with the emotional charisma of a tax audit, started in immediately about the dangerous, reckless, and psychologically damaging behavior I had displayed. He said the words active shooter with such gravity, I half expected him to demand air raid sirens in the neighborhood. Karen dabbed at her eyes with a monogrammed tissue. Real tears? Who knew? Then it was Marcus's turn. He started calmly, professionally, walking the court through a simple chain of logic. I wasn't in the HOA. My property was outside their jurisdiction. The inspection had no legal foundation. I'd never been warned of any violations by the city or fire department. The rifle was legally owned, never aimed at a person, discharged upward, and the police report confirmed that no laws had been broken. But then he dropped the first real hammer, the forged safety inspection. Marcus laid out the report from Gregory Wainwright, Karen's cousin, then presented the state's licensing board records, showing Gregory wasn't licensed in California and had no legal authority to file building safety reports. He followed that with our own expert's testimony, a licensed city contractor who'd personally inspected my property and declared it code compliant in every category. Then came the emails. Evan had delivered the final payload the night before, a zipped file of HOA meeting notes, private messages, and voice recordings. Marcus handed the judge a USB stick. With your permission, Your Honor, the defense would like to play a short clip from internal HOA communications regarding the so-called emergency inspection. The judge raised an eyebrow and gave a small nod. The courtroom speakers crackled. Then Karen's unmistakable voice came through, flat and commanding. We're not going to get him on bylaws. Hit him with a safety angle. Early morning, no warning. Catch him tired and angry. Get a reaction on camera. The courtroom fell silent. You could hear someone coughing in the back. Even Karen's attorney froze for a moment before regaining his composure. The judge narrowed her eyes. Are you prepared to authenticate the source of this recording? We have multiple witnesses ready to testify, Your Honor, Marcus said, including a current HOA member who provided these files under subpoena. Karen turned her head slowly toward the back of the courtroom, and that's when Evan stepped forward. Dressed neat, nervous but solid. She went white. He took the stand and calmly confirmed his role. He was on the HOA committee, had access to the private Slack, and had provided unedited evidence of coordinated targeting. And then, Karen cracked. She stood up mid-testimony and hissed, loud enough for the court to hear, "You little rat, you ruined everything." "Ms. Wainwright," the judge barked, "sit down, now." But Karen didn't stop. She waved a hand toward the clerk. "He's lying. They're all lying. "You don't understand what it's like trying to keep this neighborhood in line." The cane clattered to the ground as she took a step forward, not limping at all. Silence. The judge slowly leaned back and said, in a tone colder than steel, "Duly noted." What followed wasn't the dramatic hammer-slam moment TV shows like to portray. It was more brutal in its precision. The judge ordered a recess. Marcus smiled like a man watching a glacier break. Outside, reporters had already gathered. Karen left through the back, flanked by her lawyer, one boot now magically removed. I made eye contact with clipboard guy on her team. He turned away like a kid caught cheating on a test. We had filed our motions. We'd exposed the fraud. Now it was a matter of time. That evening, Marcus said something I hadn't expected. "I want you to consider a countersuit." "For what?" I asked. "For defamation, for harassment, for malicious prosecution, and for every HOA member she manipulated into signing false reports or letters." "You think it'll stick?" "She tried to destroy you with lies. We've got her recorded admitting to it. This isn't just a defense anymore. It's justice. The funny thing about public opinion, it moves slow until it doesn't. One minute, you're the local lunatic who fired a rifle at the neighborhood welcome committee, and the next, you're the guy who exposed a corrupt HOA queenpin with a god complex and a neck brace made of lies. Within 48 hours of that courtroom disaster, the internet had done what it does best: dig, mock, and immortalize. Clips of the court recording had leaked. Karen's little outburst, "You don't understand what it's like trying to keep this neighborhood in line," was already being remixed into TikTok audios and set to dubstep. Someone uploaded a clip of her losing the cane and walking just fine to a soundtrack of Curb Your Enthusiasm. But under the jokes, the story had teeth. Local journalists ran pieces on overreach by homeowners associations. The HOA board's finances were called into question. A city councilman, who apparently had his own unresolved beef with Karen over zoning permits, suddenly found time to hold a press conference about the unfortunate consequences of unchecked HOA authority. The sharks were circling. And in the middle of it all, Marcus and I filed the countersuit. It was clean, sharp, and surgical. Defamation, malicious prosecution, invasion of privacy, civil harassment, and abuse of process. We included 10 supporting affidavits from neighbors, people who had been coerced, fined, or threatened by Karen and her crew over the past 2 years. One of those affidavits came from a widow named Mrs. Ellison, 82, quiet, lived down the hill. She recounted how Karen had tried to force her into paying HOA dues by threatening to report her overgrown hedges to Adult Protective Services. APS. Over hedges. The woman cried while Marcus gently took her statement. It wasn't about just me anymore. The day after we filed the countersuit, I got a call from Deputy Whitaker, one of the 2 officers who had responded the morning I fired the warning shots. His tone was polite, but there was something underneath it. "I think you should know, Mike," he said. "Your case stirred up something bigger." "How much bigger?" "Well, someone's looking at past 911 records. The call that came in about you was flagged. There's a discrepancy in the timing. And we just got a tip about a certain HOA president contacting an off-duty officer before filing that report." There it was. Karen had tried to coordinate the whole thing in advance, manufacture an incident, preload the system. And now the system was pushing back. Later that week, Marcus and I sat down with a county investigator. They were opening a probe into Karen's communications with city officials, building inspectors, and, more interestingly, a lieutenant in the public safety office who'd allegedly expedited her requests for code enforcement actions against residents she didn't like. They called it favor trafficking. We called it karma. Meanwhile, Evan kept sending me updates. The HOA board was fracturing. One member resigned quietly. Another sent Evan a panicked message asking how to distance themselves from the Wainwright situation. A third tried to delete the Slack history, but Evan, being Evan, had already backed it up in triplicate. My wife started baking again. Cookies, pies, even those sugar-covered lemon bars she only made when something good was about to happen. The kids stopped giving me that weird, "Is Dad a felon?" look, and started asking if I'd be famous. I told them, only if Karen keeps digging. And she did. She filed a request to dismiss our countersuit on the grounds of emotional distress, said she was too unwell to participate in drawn-out legal theatrics, and that the process was triggering her trauma. The judge denied it, flatly. Then she tried another trick, A cease and desist letter claiming my continued presence in the neighborhood was creating an unsafe emotional environment. We framed that one and hung it in the garage. But the best twist came from an unexpected place. A city zoning clerk named Danny, who I'd barely spoken to during the past decade. She reached out through Marcus. Turns out Danny had processed several expedited zoning adjustments for the HOA over the years. Most were routine, but one stood out. An unrecorded attempt to redraw neighborhood boundaries to include my property retroactively. It was submitted months before the inspection incident. Never approved, never disclosed. Karen had been planning to pull me under the HOA by force, and she'd failed. But that failure never stopped her from acting like she already had the power. We got the documents, we added them to the case, and then we waited. Because the funny thing about legal battles, once you get the system's attention, once you pull back the curtain and show them how the sausage is made, they don't just stop looking. Sometimes they start kicking down doors. By the 6th week, Karen Wainwright had gone silent, at least publicly. No more neighborhood meetings, no interviews, no saccharine letters signed, "with care, your ever-vigilant HOA." It was like she vanished, leaving her remaining board members to patch the hull of a sinking ship while pretending everything was just fine. Spoiler, it wasn't fine. The county's investigation had grown teeth. They weren't just looking at the inspection setup anymore. They were combing through 5 years' worth of HOA financial records, whistleblower complaints, and 911 call logs connected to this HOA and several others Karen had consulted for. Apparently, our queen bee had been mentoring other local HOA leaders in how to maximize compliance. Translation: how to squeeze residents dry without ever technically breaking the law. Technically. But now, we had more than technicalities. We had records, voices, screenshots, forged signatures, falsified invoices, and we had people, good people, finally willing to talk. Evan's leak had opened the floodgates. One woman, a mother of 2 on the next block, came forward with a full printed thread of messages where Karen threatened to report her daycare as a commercial business if she didn't pay retroactive dues, even though her house wasn't in HOA territory either. Another neighbor, Frank, a retired Marine, mild-mannered, testified that Karen once told him he'd have to relocate his flagpole or face daily fines for unauthorized vertical structures. Vertical structures. The absurdity would have been funny if it hadn't been real. Marcus worked around the clock. He coordinated affidavits, subpoenaed communication logs, and even had a forensic tech review the HOA's official meeting minutes, which turned out to have been heavily edited after the fact. Karen had a habit of holding informal votes via text, then fabricating consensus in polished PDFs. The judge wasn't amused. During a pre-trial hearing on the countersuit, she ordered a full forensic audit of HOA activity, particularly any financial transactions involving private inspections, legal threats, or donations made to certain officials, including the now sweating officer in the public safety office who'd quietly gone on leave. Rumor was he'd been subpoenaed too. And then came the wild card. Evan messaged me late one night. "We've got a problem. Karen's planning something." I called him immediately. "What kind of something?" "She's holding a special meeting, emergency status, to install a new HOA president. She's trying to transfer power to one of her loyalists before she's formally removed." I laughed. "A puppet government. She's moving fast, trying to lock the board, cover her trail. If they vote tonight, it'll complicate things." Marcus was already in his car before I finished relaying the message. We showed up at the HOA's little office, technically a repurposed garage owned by one of the board members, just in time to watch the tail end of a sham vote. Karen was there, still bracing on her useless cane, but her voice was sharp. "Effective immediately," she was saying. "Trevor will assume interim presidential duties while I take an extended medical leave. I trust the board will honor this transition." Trevor, a pudgy, red-faced man with all the leadership skills of a damp napkin, nodded solemnly like he was being knighted. No one clapped, no one even looked happy. That's when Marcus stepped forward and said, "You're aware this meeting violates both your charter and California's Open Meetings Act, correct?" Karen paled. "The new bylaw provisions were passed in the January session," she said, defensive. Marcus smiled. "The ones you never filed with the city clerk?" "Yeah, we checked. And we also have records showing that January session was attended by exactly 2 board members and no quorum." He pulled out his phone and played a clip. Karen's voice from the Slack archive. "Just submit the minutes yourself. They don't check." Several of the board members looked like they were about to puke. Karen snapped, "This is a private meeting." "It's not," Marcus replied calmly, "because we're now in possession of a court order authorizing immediate preservation of all HOA records, digital and otherwise. You'll want to comply." Trevor muttered something under his breath. Karen looked ready to burst. Instead, she just turned and walked out. Not limping, not wincing, just marching. Back outside, Evan caught up to me. He looked exhausted, but something in his face had shifted. "They're scared now," he said. Finally. The next day, I got a call from a local reporter named Jessie. She'd covered the first story when Karen painted me as a lunatic with a gun. Now she wanted a follow-up. The other side. I agreed. We met on my front porch, same one where the HOA goon squad had pounded on my door at 6 a.m. that morning so long ago. She brought a cameraman, a notepad, and a new angle. How one man's stand exposed an HOA power cult. Catchy. She asked good questions. I gave honest answers. I told her about the years of harassment, the inspections, the threats, the lawsuit, the neighbors who were too afraid to speak out. She asked, "Did you ever think it would go this far?" I said, "No." But I'm damn glad it did. Courtrooms are funny places, quiet, stiff, all about rules and formality. And yet sometimes they feel like the most dangerous rooms in the world. You can walk in a citizen and walk out ruined or vindicated. Depends on the day. This day, it was Karen's reckoning. The civil trial for the countersuit had finally begun. Our defamation and harassment case was consolidated with the HOA's original claim against me, which was now reduced to a pathetic skeleton of its former self, stripped of fake reports, doctored evidence, and half its witnesses, many of whom had either recanted or lawyered up. Karen still showed up in court. No brace, no sunglasses this time. Just a beige blazer, a forced smile, and a silence that reeked of legal advice. Her new attorney sat stone-faced beside her, flipping through a binder he already seemed to regret. Marcus opened our case like a surgeon. Clean incisions, no wasted motion. He didn't give a speech. He presented facts, and each one landed like a punch to the ribs. First, he established my non-membership in the HOA with official property maps and county documentation. Then came the timeline of harassment. Years of fines, warnings, and threats, all targeting someone who was never under their jurisdiction. Then he introduced the internal HOA communications. Those Slack logs. They made the courtroom squirm. The recorded planning of an illegal inspection, baiting strategies, jokes about triggering me, even suggestions about how to edit minutes retroactively. Karen visibly flinched when her own voice was played for the second time. Catch him tired and angry. Get a reaction on camera. The judge didn't flinch. She scribbled notes. Fast, deliberate, focused. Then came the financials. Marcus showed how Karen had authorized unapproved expenditures, payments to consultants, overpriced inspection fees, personal reimbursements without receipts. Then came the big one, a bank transfer to a private account linked to her cousin, the fake engineer. It was labeled Community Safety Review. We even had the metadata from the original safety report file. It had been edited the night before the inspection attempt from Karen's laptop. Karen's lawyer objected. The judge overruled twice. Then came the witnesses. Evan took the stand again, calm, clear, confident. He explained his role, the internal pressure, the fear others felt. He named names, described how he'd been instructed to file documents without board approval. Then Mrs. Ellison and Frank, and the mother whose daycare Karen tried to shut down. All of them told their own versions of the same story. Fear, manipulation, manufactured violations, and a slow erosion of peace in their own homes. Karen's attorney tried to paint it as neighbors misinterpreting policy enforcement. He might as well have been selling sand in a flood. Then it was our turn to respond to the HOA's original claim that I'd endangered lives with a firearm. Marcus played the door camera footage. Me opening the door, visibly tired, rifle in one hand, shouting, "Back off my property!" Then 2 loud cracks upward. Then the police report confirming no law broken. The ballistics report proving the bullets were fired skyward. And finally, the 911 call logs, including the one Karen placed hours before the inspection, where she told a board member, "Let's do it early. If he snaps, we'll have it recorded. It's perfect." That recording hit like a grenade. Even Karen's lawyer looked stunned. She hadn't told him everything. The judge called for a recess. The room was electric. Even the bailiff raised his eyebrows at me as we stepped out. Outside, Marcus turned to me and said, "She's done. She just doesn't know it yet." When we reconvened, Karen made one last, desperate move. Her lawyer asked the court for a dismissal on mental health grounds, claimed the pressure and community hostility had caused her to suffer a cognitive break, rendering her incapable of standing proper trial for damages. It was pathetic. The judge denied it instantly. Then she spoke directly to Karen. "I find that you and your position as the HOA president abused your power, engaged in coordinated harassment, fabricated official records, and attempted to weaponize legal and community structures to target a private citizen for personal and political reasons." She paused. "And you did it arrogantly, repeatedly, and without remorse." Then she ruled, the HOA's lawsuit against me dismissed with prejudice. Karen Wainwright, personally liable for defamation, harassment, and fraud. Damages awarded $385,000 for legal fees, emotional distress, and punitive damages. HOA board temporarily dissolved pending external audit and oversight. But it wasn't just the ruling. It was the room. Reporters scribbling. Neighbors watching. Karen shrinking. Justice wasn't loud. It didn't have to be. It just had to be undeniable. 3 months later, my porch was finally quiet again. Not the calm before a storm kind of quiet, the real kind. Birds, wind, the occasional lawnmower humming in the distance. No banging on my door at 6 in the morning. No threat letters slipped into my mailbox. No HOA meetings announced with thinly veiled passive-aggressive flyers. Just quiet. The fence I'd been meaning to fix. Done. My old Chevy pickup. Running again. My Saturdays. Mine. I had coffee with my wife on the porch, grilled with the kids in the backyard, waved at neighbors who now actually smiled back. I was no one's target, no one's example, just a guy with tools and time again. But things didn't just go back to normal, not really. Karen was gone. After the ruling, she vanished like a ghost in pearls. Last anyone heard, she'd lawyered up for the criminal charges the county was preparing: fraud, falsification of official records, unlawful surveillance, and conspiracy to violate property rights. They were real charges, not the petty HOA tickets she used to sling around like parking violations. Evan got out of the HOA completely, took a job 2 towns over, and moved his family into a quiet cul-de-sac where the neighbors mostly cared about mowing days and football games. He still texts me every now and then. Still free. I always reply the same. Free as hell. And the HOA itself? Dismantled, audited, and under temporary oversight from a third-party administrator appointed by the county. Turns out our little scandal had sparked something statewide. Local news outlets picked it up. A state senator introduced a bill requiring mandatory audits and transparent financial disclosures for all HOA boards. They called it the Harper Act. I didn't ask for that. Hell, I didn't even know about it until someone tagged me in a tweet. I got invited to speak on some panel about property rights. Declined. I'm not a hero. I'm just a guy who got pushed too far and who knew how to shoot in a safe direction. The money from the damages. We kept enough to cover our legal bills, of course, paid off some debt, replaced our water heater. But the rest? I worked with Marcus and a few neighbors to set up a neighborhood legal defense fund, something for regular folks to use if they ever found themselves staring down the barrel of bureaucratic madness. We called it No Trespassers. A little inside joke. The judge sent me a handwritten letter 2 weeks after the final ruling. Just one line. Holding your ground is legal. Holding your truth is brave. I kept that one. As for Karen's victims, the ones who'd been fined, pushed, manipulated, one by one they came by, with pie, wine, handshakes, quiet thank yous. Not everyone spoke much. Some just nodded. That was enough. The best part? Mrs. Ellison's hedges are a jungle now, and no one says a damn thing. And me? I sleep in on Saturdays now. Every Saturday. My rifle stays locked in the safe. My camera still works, just in case. But mostly, it catches raccoons and Amazon guys tripping over the hose. I still keep the court transcript, though, just in the drawer, labeled in big black Sharpie, How to Deal with HOA Royalty, in case anyone ever forgets.